Fireside Football Chat, episode 4, and really looking forward to this one, talking to Brady Kannon. And we're going to get into a lot of stuff about your background and your experiences, really some great experiences. So I'm happy to hear some of the stories, share it with the audience, and so on. We're back here on Wednesdays, and so this is casual talk for everybody listening. We'll get into free agency, maybe a little bit about the draft and some early opinions. I know it's supposed to be the off season, Brady, and you're involved so much in golf, but you're managing two different things going on right now. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great, and thanks so much for having me, Ron. It's a real honor to be invited, and I always enjoy any conversation with you. So nice to actually put together a little formal show to do some of that. Yeah, the football never sleeps, right? So I'm sitting here, 100% focused on golf. We're that much closer to the Masters coming up in 2 weeks now, which is absolutely one of my favorite times of the year, one of my favorite events of the entire year in any sport. But now you've got all this stuff going on with football and free agency, and the draft is coming up. So yeah, I kind of have to keep half an eye on it for sure. You and I have done a lot of different shows together, talking about the draft, talking about football, and like you allude to, I kind of have two different seasons. I dive in heavy to PGA Tour golf handicapping and NFL handicapping. And I always say, for everything else, I listen to smart people. If I want to bet a college basketball game or baseball or whatever, I certainly have some of my own handicapping knowledge, but I'll rely on people I trust that specialize in those fields. But it is kind of nice that golf and football don't really overlap. So I never have to juggle both of them too much at the same time. So I'll kind of keep, like I say, half an eye on the goings on of football. I love the draft. I've said before, I'm not so sure I don't love the draft more than the football regular season.
Yeah.
It's really a neat event for me. But then typically, like around the 1st of August, somewhere between late July and mid-August, I'll kind of just set everything aside and dive into the NFL for, 2, 3, 4 weeks and kind of do a lot of preseason prep at that time. And that really begins to kick off the NFL season for me.
Yeah, and I think that prep is very important so that we're not going in completely blind and you've got kind of a game plan going on. It doesn't matter when you started, but to have that game plan before the first day of the kickoff. I'm a college and NFL guy pretty much only, and even the college news doesn't stop because 24 hours ago, the 30th coach just got relieved of his duties at near Stanford, which is Bay Area, which is back to some of your beginnings and so on. So this thing never stops. I don't know how we have time for going other places, but I like the downtime as well. Let's go back to 1991, where you started working at KSFO Radio, starting, you said, your career in sports. How was that? And some of the names you mentioned to me, they're still relevant now.
Yeah. That was a tremendous experience. I graduated from University of San Diego. I think it was 91. And later on, my first job out of college was at KSFO Radio as a sports reporter. I worked with a legendary morning show team, legendary DJ there who had been with the station for 30 years. And I was fortunate enough to work with John Madden. John Madden came on this guy's show for 12 years in a row, Monday through Friday. He would do 2 spots with this DJ named Gene Nelson. And it became the most famous spot in the Bay Area. It was the highest priced advertising the station could sell because it was such a coveted spot to hear Madden talk, twice per morning with Gene. And I'm telling you, Ron, the best conversations they ever had were not about sports. Usually it was about food or Madden's trips on the bus. And it was just a great way to begin my career in sports. I covered the A's, the Giants, the Warriors, the 49ers, got to go, on the court, on the field. And, for a 20-something-year-old kid, that was just a dream job. But then the station sold for about the third time. I had survived a few ownership changes, but I think it was the third time that the ownership had changed there at KSFO. They wiped everybody out, including Madden. They went all satellite radio. They went to Rush Limbaugh and all this stuff. And there wasn't a live body hardly in the building. And that's when I moved to Las Vegas and took a job with the Sports Fan Radio Network at the time. It's no longer around, but, got to work with a lot of other big names there, including Pete Rose. And that's,
Wow.
In moving to Las Vegas, that's when I was introduced to sports betting front and center. I was, I was always aware of a point spread, but nobody in my family gambled. I was just, it was not on my radar at all. And then I came to Las Vegas and I was like, wow, okay. And I was working with Dave Koken, who was a dear friend, just recently passed away, God bless him, and some handicappers that used to come on our show and we'd break down the games, Mark Lawrence, Jim Feist, Dr. Bob, and so I became friends with all these guys and I kind of learned this whole new, the game within the game. And it was just fascinating to me. And here we are 30 years later, and I still certainly don't know everything. We say that in sports betting, you learn something new every day. But just how it seems like the layers to the sports betting industry are endless, and discovering the beginning of that and being introduced to it 30 years ago in Las Vegas, it's been a fascinating venture for me ever since.
Yeah, and these guys that you mentioned, a lot of them are very process driven. And so what an education that is for, somebody young in their 20s and so on to get that, that's kind of gold standard to be able to get that, to network it, so early. That's wonderful.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I remember, I'm not going to tell the story. This isn't my stories today, but I remember my first football bet and sweating it out. I mean, the first real bet where you're betting that nickel and you're saying, oh my goodness, and you're sweating it out and whatever. And my first, bet in a lot of different sports. You, I think, have a story to tell about your first horse racing bet. And I think it's I don't know the story, but I know, what the odds paid based on what you told me. So walk me through Thunder Gulch.
Yeah, that was great. It was while I was at Sports Fan Radio Network. And of course, I came to Las Vegas in November of 94. And the very next Kentucky Derby was, of course, in May of 95. And I was working at Sports Fan Radio Network, and leading up to the Derby, we did a bunch of interviews with jockeys and trainers. And so I used a very advanced system of handicapping here, Ron. I boiled it down to which jockeys and trainers had been on our show and which ones were very good and which ones were not so good and which ones had stiffed us and no-showed us. And, so I was basically going off of who really performed well on our show and who not so much or didn't show up or whatever. And I boiled down to, I'm still pretty sure it was Dwayne Lucas was the trainer. And I know Gary Stevens was the jockey on Thunder Gulch, and they had both come on our show. And, anyway, process of elimination, I'm like, okay, well, that's who I'm going to bet on. And again, I referenced that just a moment ago. I was completely green on sports betting upon arrival in Las Vegas. I'd never bet on a Kentucky Derby before. I'm not even sure if I'd watched a Kentucky Derby before. And here we were in the midst of all this excitement and everything. I remember I've been forever hooked. That it literally is the most exciting 2 minutes in sports. Oh my God, the sports book is going nuts. I was like, this is fantastic. And so, 20 something years old, I put $2 across the board. $2 to win, place, and show on Thunder Gulch. Got about $100 and some back, and it was the greatest thing in the world. Yeah, that was something. But and Gary Stevens has always been a guy, going to school in San Diego and racing there at Del Mar and stuff. I was always kind of familiar with him, so. That was a lot of fun. And like I say, I've been a fan of horse racing and the Kentucky Derby ever since.
Yeah, what a wonderful introduction into wagering, right to the Kentucky Derby. And boy, I have not been in a sports book during those 2 minutes, but I can hear it in your voice. It must be
Oh
fascinating.
God, I mean the whole room is on their feet and it's a fever. Yeah, it was something.
Unbelievable. So down the road, then I don't know if you're hooked, but you have that thrill and so on, and then you're going through, and then there's this thing called contest wagering,
Yeah.
and eventually it leads you to the Hilton contest and the Super contest, and your partnership and your amazing over 72.5% in winning that contest, and that the whole contest methodology, it's still fascinating to me to this day. So walk us through how that developed, that partnership and your contest wagering, and what that year must have been like.
It's been downhill ever since. I won. I won the member guest golf tournament at my country club in 2011, and then won the Super contest. And like I say, yeah, I've been disappointing ever since. So a friend of mine, this was probably in the neighborhood of 2005. Maybe 2004, 2005, asked me if I wanted to play in the Hilton Super Contest. And I'd kind of heard about it before. And, it was $1,500 back at that time. And again, I was still pretty young. And I was like, wow, that's a lot of money to shell out. And he said, well, we're going to do 5 of us. We each make one pick and it's just $300 a piece. And I said, oh, that sounds fun. So I did that for a couple of years, and we won the mini contest. They used to have the last 3 weeks of the season was a mini contest, and we won that. And then I decided, and that's when I started to get into the handicapping of the NFL more seriously myself. And these other guys that I was playing with were not nearly as serious. They had a lot of fun with it and they liked to play in the contest and stuff. But I was like, you know what? I want to put together a team of more serious guys, and I want to see if I can do even better in this contest. So we had a few different teams that I tried for the next handful of years. And then finally in 2011, obviously we had the perfect foursome. It was a team of 4, and that's kind of a funny story in itself. We had a team of 5 the year before. And the 5th guy, we added him, and it came August of the following season in 2011. And I said, hey, Bill, we're ready to sign up for the contest. Are you on board again this year? And he said, nah, you know what, Brady? So that was fun last year, but I'm going to pass. And so it was just 4 of us. And we, of course, went on to win the thing. But no, that was just an absolute thrill, Ron. I mean, I can almost recall most of the games we were on. I mean, if you told me the game and what our pick was, I can probably remember the last 2 minutes and just sweating out. You know how an NFL game is. The last 2 minutes becomes a coin flip, whether you cover the spread or not. And it felt like in those coin flip finishes, we won 85% of the time. And that's pure luck. We had a team of 4. Like I say, we hit the 72.5%. As a very astute NFL and college football handicapper, you can have a tremendous year and hit 62, 64. You can have one of those type of years. Right. And we all happen to have a career year like that. But that additional 10% or whatever to get us to 70% or better, it was just that dumb luck at the end of the game. The pick 6 that goes your way, the fumble recovery that goes your way, all that stuff. That quirky, crazy, zany stuff that happens at the end of a football game, we happen to be on the right side of them more often than not. And it was an absolute thrill. The money was great. We won $320,000 split between 4 of us. But really, the big win for me, and I'm really the only guy of the 4 of us on our team that really has used this to, turn into a kind of a revitalization, I guess, of my media career. I came to Las Vegas for radio. I then got into the golf business. And after I won the contest, I got back into the media, and here we are doing podcasts and Sports Grid. And, so the Super Contest win meant a lot more to me than the money. It really meant, the burgeoning of a second career. And then what I was going to say too is the title. I remember a friend told me, when we were, I don't know if we had won yet or whatever, but he said, the money's great, but the title, that's the deal. And it is. I mean, I'm so fortunate to be one of, maybe 40 people in the history of Las Vegas to say that they're a Super Contest winner.
Yeah, I mean, that's got to be really exciting. And for me, I've got to say straight out, I don't have that contest acumen. People say, oh, you're successful, you win X percent, 57, 58, over 60 that one or two times and stuff like that. Why don't you enter these contests? And I said, that's a different ball game for me. And kind of that leads to my question for you. As you're going through and having that spectacular year, or even after that, how different it is for you, or is it different for you to handicap a game and bet on a game versus contest strategy?
Well, it's a great question, and I'll be perfectly honest with you. It has changed quite a bit playing the contest now versus playing the contest then. When we won the contest in 2011, there were 517 entries in the Hilton Super Contest. And that was the beginning of the real explosion of the contest. Bill Simmons, the guy that used to write for ESPN, and he made it very popular. He entered the contest and he started publishing things like who his picks were and stuff like that. And so I think there was 517 entries when we won it. The next year there was like 750, and then there was 1,200, and pretty soon there was 3,500 people in the Hilton Super Contest. And then Circa came along, and now between the two of them, there's 8,000 people in those two contests or whatever. So again, to be perfectly honest with you, when there was 500 and some people, we didn't really think a whole lot about contest strategy. We were just handicapping games and picking winners. And there was a little bit, we had 4 different styles of handicappers making up our team. Mm-hmm. I typically land on underdogs. One guy typically landed on favorites. One guy had an extensive background in the casino, and so he was always thinking about it from a house perspective. Sure. And then another guy was kind of a potpourri of all of the above. And so we kind of gravitated towards different games every week. And that was kind of part of our strategy, was to have a variety. And because, like we talked about, you and I can have a fantastic outlier season and hit 63%. But we're typically landing on the same type of game. It's all underdogs, or it's all this, or it's all, but there's all different types of winners every week in the NFL. There's some public plays, there's some sharp plays, there's system plays. There's, you always get a smorgasbord of games that turn out a certain way. And so the fact that we had a variety, I think, assisted in our success in getting to a crazy percentage of winners.
Yeah, it is a fascinating discussion, and it's true. Handicapping against 500 people and then seeing you be at the top of the leaderboard towards the end, you're only handicapping against a select few at that point. But nowadays, you're handicapping against 100 people, 150 people, no matter what week it is, because
there's so much more contest theory nowadays. You're right. You really have to zig when others zag. Whereas again, when you were playing against 500 people in 2011, I mean, you hit 72.5%, you're not going to have any problem anyway.
Yeah, I know.
But it wasn't something that was on our mind. Now, fast forward 15 years later or whatever, I understand you have to strategize much differently. But back then, it wasn't as much of a factor. And before me, there was only 300 or 200 or 100.
Yeah.
There was even less people in the contest back then. Like when Steve Fezzik won 2 years in a row, how much did he really employ game theory? Probably didn't need to as much.
Right.
Back then, it's just about picking winners.
That's true. Very true. So you mentioned radio. You got back into radio, and now Sports Grid and so on. Sports Grid, for me, it wasn't really on my radar for a little while. And then these last couple of years, it's really gone there. Talk about your experience at Sports Grid and where they fit in the niche of, the radio shows, the content that they're providing.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it, Ron. After I won the Super Contest, I did a radio show once a week here in Las Vegas with a guy for 6 years. And then I was hired by VSIN, the company started by the Musburger family. And I was there for 5.5 years. And that was a great thing because it was, the radio show that I did after the contest was basically all revolving around sports betting. But then you had an entire network devoted to sports betting. And that was a wonderful platform, and I gained a tremendous amount of experience, and that really gave me added a lot to my ability. I graduated college with a degree in media and communications, did a little bit of that stuff with KSFO, but then didn't do it for 10 or so years, being in the golf business, and still am in the golf business to this day, but doing all that radio after the contest win, brushed up my broadcasting chops again. And now, fast forward to 2023 when I went to Sports Grid, it's just been fantastic. Now I'm, hosting shows on Saturdays and Sundays and appearing as a guest on a regular basis, talking about, golf during this time of year and talking about football during that time of year. But I really enjoy Sports Grid. First of all, their reach is fantastic. They really did a tremendous job, and they were really ahead of the curve about going headfirst into all the streaming networks. When they started, they really put their eggs in that basket. The Samsung TVs and the YouTubes and the Hulus and all those, hundreds of streaming services that we now have that are now commonplace. They were doing that, 8-10 years ago when that stuff was just starting to come on the scene. So now they really own that space, and their reach in that regard is tremendous. But what I like about Sports Grid is I think they do a tremendous job of blending sports talk radio and on-air personality with sports betting and handicapping. Mm-hmm. So the casual radio or television viewer audience can kind of brush up on sports talk, but then also get a little taste of a gambling angle at the same time. I think if you're going one direction or the other, you eliminate some people, you eliminate some audience. So the people that are coming there for entertainment and a fun host and sports talk, they're getting that, and they're also getting astute betting information at the same time. So that I think Sports Grid has done a tremendous job in that regard, and make themselves appealing to a very wide audience. Sports fans in general, whether they like to bet or not, can still enjoy Sports Grid.
I like that model. I like the bridging of the two. And you're right, it's good for a wider audience. But there's also the preparation part in it too. And people, when you told me it's like if you have a 3-hour show, it might be 3 hours of preparation and so on. There's a lot going on behind the scenes to make it work and to make live radio so good. So walk me through like a typical day preparing for one of your shows.
Well, when I just do, a little guest spot or something like that, it'll certainly depend on the topic. But like this time of year, I was just on earlier this morning talking about the Texas Children's Houston Open, and I go through my picks and kind of break down the golf course, and that's a handicap that I've been working on since Monday. So I've got notes in front of me and stuff like that. I've written articles, and so I'm pretty well versed on what I'm going to say or what we're going to address. I might come on later this weekend or something and kind of give an update, heading into the final round. And then I've got to do a little bit of research on like, okay, let's look at the top of the leaderboard and who's live to go on and win this thing. And I've got to do some research on the stats and why I think this guy is good or a bad bet and that type of thing. So even for just the little guest spots, there's a little bit of prep involved, not nearly as much. But when you're doing, a 2 or a 3 or a 4-hour show where I usually land on the weekends, and it's, not just the golf or the football, but then you've obviously got college basketball, you've got the NBA, you've got hockey, which I follow those sports and I'm familiar with those sports, but not like the way I am with the NFL and golf. So I've got to spend time on all of those games that are going to be going on when we're on the air and brush up on the stats and who's doing this and the playoff picture. But you could have worse jobs, right? I mean, that's fun, so that's pretty much what it involves. But yeah, I'll get started. I'll jump into the office here and have a cup of coffee and just start looking at the schedule and take my time over the course of the next, I never like to be rushed, like cramming for a test. Haste makes waste. So if I'm in here, it might be 8 hours before the show, but if I'm eating breakfast and having a cup of coffee and taking a walk outside and just kind of studying the stuff all at the same time and making some notes, I like that slow pace of being able to absorb a bunch and get ready at my speed rather than being rushed to try and cram all this information. But that's pretty much what goes into it. And you know how it is with anything, I guess, Ron. The more prepared you are, the easier it is to talk about, to present, the more confident you feel in discussing it and stuff like that. So.
Yeah, excellent. So a lot of the trend, I don't think we saw this even 12 months ago, certainly not 24 months ago, but the concept of live betting. And if you watch any of the shows, more on Sports Grid than on VSiN, for example, with Gabe and a couple of the others, and on your show and so on, you're given in game and you're given the odds in game and what's going on. And there's that possibility of a live bet to make something as the event is going on. And I think that's wonderful and the way the market is going, but it also can be dangerous and impulsive if you step out of your money management scheme, if all of a sudden you're too involved in that. What's the balancing act? What's, from your observations, even if you're not doing as much live betting, what are your thoughts on the live betting market?
It's really fun. It's fascinating because it's so fast moving. And it's relatively new. I mean, how long has this really been around? Really? 5, 6, 7 years at the most, it seems. But I love doing shows like that where you see those scores flip and you see the odds flip and it's just this market that is constantly in flux. It's very difficult. The money management's really tough because when you're making a bet, you kind of, at least myself, I go through a process. Okay, here's the bet I like. Here's what I want to risk. All right, got it. Bang, bang. There's a methodical process to it, and eventually you hit submit. The live wagering. I mean, this is on the fly. And then you put on top of that, I'm sitting here on air trying to do a show and talk about it and look. And so there's also other limitations that I have. When we do a show on Sports Grid, we're typically referencing the markets from FanDuel. And FanDuel is not available in Las Vegas or anywhere in Nevada. So what I'm seeing on the screen being offered is not necessarily what's being offered, here locally. Then I'd have, punch up my local app, go through that, all of that. It's kind of too many moving parts for me to really jump into a live bet unless we go to commercial and the event happens to go to commercial at the same time. It just happens to be that rarely do I really get an opportunity. So when I'm on air discussing those in-game live betting shows and opportunities, I try and recommend things. I try and say, well, here's what I'm thinking, and here's what makes sense to me. But I'm not going to tell you that I'm actually doing it, because most of the time I'm not. And I don't like to sit here and tell people what to do if I'm not doing it myself. I basically never do that. All the articles I write, anything that I, publish online prior to tip off, prior to kickoff, prior to whatever it is, I have action on myself. But the live stuff that we're talking about during a show, it's oftentimes so difficult for me to not only get the bet in, but also go through that process of, okay, how much do I want to do? What's my bankroll? Where, while I'm trying to do a show on air. So again, I'll try and give my opinions and everything. And we have some fun with it that way too. We'll kind of say, well, an hour ago, we thought this was a good play, and look, sure enough, it turns out that it is, so we have fun with it like that, and just try and recommend rather than actually, put our words into action, I guess, for me personally, because sometimes and my co-host, you've been on with Adam Kaufman before. Now he's in Boston, so he has that ability. And sometimes when we go to break, he will make a wager. I don't always have that luxury.
Yeah, it's different in Nevada without FanDuel and DraftKings. It's different in California without anything. So it is a little crazy there. That limits me, but I'm telling you, it's not for everyone. It's really something I would recommend practicing first, listening to people like yourself and so on, saying, what would I do? Tracking. I'm a big believer in tracking how you're doing, tracking your bets. What are you good at? What are you not so good at? And so on. It's the same with live betting. And the impulse of that is so stimulating, but maybe that's what the books want.
Yeah. You got to guard against that type of thing. It's kind of like betting, static betting, if we call it that, betting prior to game time. Oftentimes the mentality in sports betting is to be contrarian. What 90% of the people think, if they were right all the time, the sports books would go out of business. Sometimes you want to be in the minority. And I think with live betting, it's kind of similar, where if you have a hockey game that, in the first 10 minutes of the first period, all of a sudden it's 3-0 or it's 2-1. And all of a sudden there's 3 goals that are scored. And the natural reaction is, oh my gosh, this is going to go over the total. The live market now has the total at 9.5 goals rather than 5.5 or 6.5. And oftentimes the best bet is the other way, to go the under. I think that's kind of a general rule of thumb in live betting. If we're talking the NFL and all of a sudden there's 3 touchdowns scored in the first quarter, in the live market, you may want to go under what the adjusted total game is now, because that's what'll happen when you get this flood one way or another early in the contest, and the live market adjusts. Sometimes it's an over adjustment, and the smart bet again is to kind of be opposite or contrarian. I think that's kind of a general rule of live betting. Doesn't always work out that way, but I think those opportunities, when you get them, are good opportunities.
Yeah, I agree completely on that. So had we done this show 24 hours ago, we would probably be talking a little bit differently about free agency. But just in the last 24 hours, the Giants are now 2 quarterbacks new with Winston and now Russell Wilson. Buffalo all of a sudden is Stephon Diggs. Where did he go? He
New England.
New England.
Yeah, so going to be playing against his old team in Buffalo.
Playing against his old team, and we don't know the contract structure completely. 3 years, $69 million is what I heard, but that could be all wrapped up in performance bonuses and upfront money and so on. But he comes in as wide receiver 1 there. We've seen some changes right away. You've been following a little bit, I'm sure, of the free agent market. What are your general impressions so far?
I guess it's just more of the same. Every year we see some guys find new homes, and specifically, we've done shows before. I grew up in the Bay Area, as you mentioned earlier, and I grew up a 49er fan. I grew up in a 49er household, not an Oakland Raider household. So, even though I'm my fandom has changed over the years as you get older, and also the more you get into sports betting, but I still, am a fan at heart of the 49ers. So I kind of tend to look at what they're doing. And I think it's been very interesting to see that, and I'm kind of happy about it, that it looks like they're really cleaning house. They had their opportunities for the last 4 or 5 years. They've been to a couple Super Bowls. They've been to an NFC championship game when they lost to the Eagles. So they have had their chances, but it seems now that they realize, that window, that chapter has closed, and they have had a lot of players lost to free agency. They've cut some players, and I'm kind of glad to see them, keep some of the main stars in place. But let's start over. You've got Aaron Rodgers, one of the big name free agents out there. I don't know. I mean, what makes sense for Aaron Rodgers? I don't even know. This is one thing I said to you. I think he has to go somewhere where there's a really good offensive line. Yeah. Aaron Rodgers did not look very good to me at all last season. And I think part of the issue was he didn't get much protection. We saw Tom Brady be very successful all the way up until his last game, pretty much, because he always was surrounded by a good offensive line. I think Rodgers may have one more run in him if he's got a really good offensive line, but I just don't know where he's going to find that with the right team that wants him. I'm not sure at all what's going to happen there. You've had a lot of guys, I think, accumulated or signed with the Denver Broncos, 2 49ers, notably excellent defenders, Dre Greenlaw and Talanoa Hufanga, a strong safety and a linebacker, 2 of the best defenders on that 49er team for the last handful of years. Denver looks to be getting aggressive in the free agent market. And we know they made a pretty good run last year, had a great season last year. And that division is amazing too. I mean, look at the coaches in that division, the talent that the AFC West is something. And I know the Raiders have kind of been the doormat of that league, but I think they're improving as well. So, what else is there to say about football? I mean, I thought one free agent move that I thought was pretty astute was the Kansas City Chiefs picking up Elijah Mitchell, the 49er running back who was the backup to Christian McCaffrey. Now, Mitchell has had some injury problems, but boy, is he good. I mean, when he's healthy, he was outstanding for the 49ers when he was healthy, and he wasn't healthy all that often. It seemed like he was around for 3 or 4 years, and he was probably injured for 2 or 3 of them. But boy, if things work out in Kansas City, I think they got a good one right there.
Yeah, I do a lot of draft reports, 45 of them, I think, over the years. And he's one I remember. He had the pedigree to be successful in the NFL. You never know with injuries, it can derail a career, or if they get a year removed from it, they find their peak performance, and he's still young. So I would agree with you with that. We saw in San Francisco's own division how Seattle reinvented themselves with actual promising drafts, especially in 2022 and 2023. They used to be the most unconventional drafting team I'd ever witnessed. And then they went much more, mainstream, I would say, and selected some really good players, starting with their cornerback Witherspoon. And we saw the Rams, without a first-round pick for forever, start to restock the roster with 24 picks and a lot of playing time for these rookies. And I think San Francisco, who's usually has a large number of picks as well, is trying to follow in that footsteps. I think that NFC West is going to be pretty contentious this year.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I like the way you've spelled that out. I believe the 49ers and I think maybe the Baltimore Ravens are tied for the most draft picks this upcoming draft this season. They both have 11, 12, 13, something like that.
Yeah.
I'm kind of, as a Niner fan, excited about that. Hey, let's start over, reshuffle the deck. I'm fine with Brock Purdy. I think he's very good. They're keeping Nick Bosa. Fred Warner's still around. So, some of the core talent is still there. McCaffrey's still there. He's probably got a couple of good years left, at least, if he, knock on wood, if he stays healthy. The Rams have just been incredible. I mean, you got to give huge credit to Sean McVay. Gosh, is he good. Sure. And Matthew Stafford too. I mean, gosh, have I enjoyed watching him the last couple of years. This guy, he is so good. I mean, you look at some of the throws he makes, we always focus so much on Patrick Mahomes and the no look passes and everything. Stafford does all the same stuff. He's not as mobile, but God, is he good. I mean, they almost went to the Super Bowl. They almost beat the Eagles. They had the drive down at the end in that game in the snow. Nakua, who spent some time here in Las Vegas. He and his family are from this area. The Rams, it's interesting. We were talking about this on Sports Grid not too long ago. The 49ers Super Bowl odds, I believe, are around 13-1, something like that. And the Rams are around 25-1 or something. I think that gap is much shorter. If not, the Rams should be favored. I think the Rams are maybe the favorite in that division. We've seen what's happened to San Francisco. Now, you can't really put a price on anything until probably after the draft and that type of thing, the schedule, all this other stuff. But I would say right now, the Rams appear to be the favorite in that division. And I tell you what, let's not forget about Arizona. I think Jonathan Gannon has done a very good job in his short career there with that team. That team did not have a lot of weapons in the cupboard to choose from. And I think they've improved steadily each year as well. It was his first year where I think they covered a lot of spreads. They were competitive in a lot of games for the first half. And then they kind of ran out of gas because they didn't have the talent that their opponent had. But they're on the up and up, I believe. And we'll see if Kyler Murray is the answer long-term, but boy, that tight end, his name is escaping me right now. That guy's a fantastic player. But I think they're going to make some noise too in that. I mean, San Francisco could finish last in that division. Maybe you get the Rams, the Cardinals, Seattle, and the Niners. I don't know.
Yeah, it is crazy. And I've always touted the value of tight ends to a system, and McBride of Arizona is that example. And there's some really good tight ends coming out this year. And that bodes well for the Raiders too, having a year of Brock Bowers, regardless of who was throwing to him at the quarterback spot. He just couldn't be stopped. And Arizona, they manipulated pretty nicely in terms of setting up last year's draft to get 7 of the first 100 picks or something like that because of their trades the previous year. So they were in that youth movement. I didn't mention them as well. If they can fix their defense just a little bit more, then they can be competitive as well. You mentioned the Raiders briefly there, and Geno Smith is there now. The question is he a bridge quarterback, or is he the guy that we're not going to draft a quarterback right now? He's good enough right now. We need to upgrade the rest of the talent, and then we'll get the quarterback a little bit later. What's your thoughts on that scenario?
I think it's probably a little bit of both, and it's probably an open-ended answer as well. Like if he all of a sudden is great for a couple of seasons, then hey, keep him around. But I think the initial thought is that he's going to be a bridge. He's going to be a gap filler for a couple of years or what happens here in the draft when, free agency. I'm certainly believing that the Raiders are in a holding pattern as far as the quarterback goes right now. And they want to see what comes along. I don't think that they believe Geno Smith is their future. I think he's their immediate future, certainly, but not long-term. I really like how Tom Brady has, really gotten his hands around this thing and is starting to kind of control the direction this franchise wants to go in. Mark Davis, I don't know the man personally, but I think he has done, and of course we know his father's reputation with minorities and communities.
Sure.
Mark Davis has done a tremendous job in following suit in that regard and taking care of former Raiders and hiring minorities and reaching out in the community. And it's been a really good relationship, I believe, from that standpoint here in Las Vegas. Now, the weakness the man has is running a football team. And I think he's finally kind of acknowledged that and given the reins to Tom Brady. And we don't know if Tom Brady's good at that, but I like what he's done so far. I think Pete Carroll is a great guy to change the culture in that building. Is Pete Carroll going to coach for the next 10 years? Probably not. But he's probably a good guy to have in that building for the next few years to turn this around. I think Chip Kelly kind of has that energy as well, and he's got that innovation on offense. And then you bring in Spytek, who was Brady's guy in Tampa Bay as the general manager. So I really like the direction they're heading right now. I think Geno Smith is going to be fine. He's had great success, especially indoors. We know his accuracy has been at a very high level, for a couple of seasons in Seattle. The problem is the turnovers. If this guy could eliminate half of his turnovers, he might be an all-pro. So I think there's possibly a lot of upside for Geno Smith and the new environment. And no, am I ready to bet them to make the playoffs and win total and all that stuff? No, but I really like the direction that they're heading right now. It feels like for the first time in God knows how long that there's light at the end of the tunnel, and the mood seems to be changing. And I think that's because of Tom Brady and because of Pete Carroll. And I mean, this mood that has been a dark cloud over the Raiders for decades, 25 years or so, has been a very difficult one to escape. And it seems like the pieces are starting to come into place that are moving on from that.
I appreciate all those comments, and I agree 100% with everything. And I think it's underappreciated what the Davis family has done with minorities and minority hiring and so on. I don't know why that doesn't get emphasized more. And I also like the Tampa Bay connection, because we've seen how Tampa Bay handles business and handles the draft. They don't typically draft in the bottom 5. You see certain organizations, because I study GMs too, that are constantly drafting in the bottom 10, like Atlanta, with talent, but not enough of it. And they don't seem to know their needs. So maybe the Raiders step out of that in a very tough division. And I want to, if I mention to you, I think Kansas City's in a little bit of trouble next year, do you think I'm crazy, or do you think I'm onto something?
No, I don't think you're crazy at all, because it's been for 2 years in a row now. This team, just pulls a rabbit out of their, what. For the last couple of years, the Chiefs have not been that great. I mean, how they won the Super Bowl 2 years ago is a minor miracle. They had turnovers and penalties out the wazoo, to the tune that no normal mortal team would ever have even made the playoffs, let alone win the Super Bowl. And then last year they kind of did it again. They were just very fair to Midland, and then all of a sudden they just find a way to win. I mean, how many times did they squeak by the skin of their teeth last year? And it started with the very first game of the season with Isaiah Likely's toe on the end line. I mean, that's like the microcosm of the entire season for the Chiefs.
Yeah.
I'm glad they lost in the Super Bowl. Congratulations to the Eagles. But it's like, geez, finally this team didn't get away with murder. No, I think it's been a couple of years now that they've been a bet against team, but Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes, that is, it's like Scotty Scheffler and Rory McIlroy in the golf tournament this week. It's pretty, they are the favorite year in and year out. And hats off to them. They're fantastic. But yeah, I think some of the pieces around them, Kelsey's getting older. Mahomes and Reid they seem to be just fine, where there's no problem with those two guys. Kelsey's getting older, the running game wasn't what it was, the offensive line doesn't seem to be what it was. So, there's little chinks in the armor versus what we saw a few years ago. But obviously they're still maintaining an incredibly high level of success. With Mahomes and Reid at the controls, you can never count them out completely. But what you're saying, it appears for the last couple of seasons that they've been at a different level, a much lower level, despite what their results say. Sure. Overall, they've been at a lower level than what we saw previously.
Yeah, and the schedule maker, I know they're equipped to handle it because Reid's been there, Mahomes been there, but they could play on any day of the week. They do play on any day of the week. The NFL schedule makers, they tell us they like safety, but then they have these teams play on Christmas after Sunday and Saturday. So I don't believe any of that. I love their continuity at defensive coordinator, of course. That's nice when you get to keep your own guys. The Lions are going to be without their offensive coordinator, their defensive coordinator and 6 assistants. So maybe as we wind down, how does that affect a team? The Lions have a very lethal offense, but they're going to be down a lot of staff.
It's huge. And, I started to learn about this stuff, the continuity handicap. And I'm sure you're very familiar with it. You see it maybe even more so in college than you do in the pros. But it really makes quite a bit of difference. And I would say the initial thought out of the gate is that the Lions will be a bet against team, especially early in the season, because they still have that label. They still have that billing of being the Detroit Lions, this high-flying electric powerhouse of an offense. But a lot of the pieces aren't there anymore. And so I think the general perception is going to be they should be a 10-point favorite. But you know what? They might only should be a 4-point. You know what I'm saying? They're probably a little bit inflated versus what the reality might be in camp, because they've had so much change. And change, like we're talking about with the Raiders, change can be a good thing. But when you were at kind of the top of the mountaintop, change can be tough to recover from in the case of the Lions.
Yeah, it's going to be a fascinating watch. And the draft is going to shape a lot of our opinions, and the schedule, how it comes out, that's going to shape a lot of our opinions there. This is the first year that I can ever recall that all 32 teams have a first round pick.
I think I just heard that. It's the first time in a while, maybe 10 years or so. I don't know.
Yeah. It's amazing because people are starting, not every team, but a lot of teams are starting to understand the value of having that early draft pick where you could get that all pro. College kids in general are more equipped to play in the NFL. The college game is morphing closer to the NFL. Plus, at the same time, with the super seniors and now the money coming in, they're staying in the NFL longer. We saw that with the 6 quarterbacks last year, an average of something like 45 starts per quarterback. It was just crazy. So that's probably good for the NFL. Brady, any more thoughts that you have that we didn't cover in terms of the NFL draft or any team or any free agency or football thoughts?
Gosh, I don't think really, I was just going to follow up a little bit on the Detroit Lions there. I am rooting for them to be successful because boy, has Dan Campbell been fun. I mean, just from not necessarily, I mean, they've covered a lot of spreads too. They were one of the most successful before they became such a known commodity. They were the best team against the spread in the NFL Absolutely. The first couple of seasons with Dan Campbell. And I'll be honest here, Ron, I have become more jaded on the NFL in the last handful of years than I used to be. Sometimes the product just disgusts me, and the officiating, and I can go through all the typical complaints, but Dan Campbell is refreshing. I enjoy watching Lions football games. Ben Johnson, the former offensive coordinator, was brilliant. The Lions were fun. The Lions were a fun team to watch, and I'm not necessarily talking sports betting here. I'm talking entertainment. And, a lot of the league disappoints me versus, the fan I was 10 years ago or what have you. But Campbell is a guy I root for, and the Buffalo Bills too, Josh Allen, so there's still a few guys that I love to watch and that I root for. Maybe not as many as there were many years ago, but there are a couple of bright spots in the league for me that I'll be rooting for once again this season.
It's funny because I'm looking for that change one of these days that will never happen, where somebody says, hey, we should help the defense out a little bit, not make every rule for the offense. I'm a defensive oriented guy, and I appreciate good defense. I loved what New England did with the Rams in that Super Bowl where they held, well, even before that, all 3 games, they held 3 all-pro quarterbacks to 50% passing. You can't hold people to 50% passing in today's NFL. I appreciate good defense, and I wish that we didn't have to talk about officiating as much as we do these days. But by the time the season goes along, we'll be itching for football, and we'll forget about some of the some of the negatives and so on. So before I let you go, I might as well get some Masters thoughts from you.
Yeah. I'm actually writing an article as we speak here. You can check out my work, by the way, at golf.com. I'm going to be submitting it tomorrow. It'll be my early bets article for the Masters. And so there's some really interesting connections there with success at certain courses, how it translates into success at Augusta National and stuff like that. But I've got, I've got 5 early bets to win the Masters so far. And I started playing these back in January. The Masters odds are posted not long after the Masters concludes, so these odds are up there staring at you in the face for a year. And I often glance at them, and I've been going into a Masters before with 10 darn futures on the darn thing, because you're sitting there making bets, for the last 6 months or whatever. And you kind of get overloaded. Now that's not the case this year, but sometimes you see a juicy number in July and you end up betting the darn thing. But I started making a couple of bets in January this year. I landed on Hideki Matsuyama, who is a former champion at Augusta, Colin Morikawa, who has had 3 recent top 10 finishes, finished 3rd last year at Augusta. And then I went with Tommy Fleetwood, who has had some very good success at Augusta, and most notably his best ever finish last year. He also finished 3rd at the Masters last year, and Fleetwood's been playing very, very good golf so far this season. And then I went with a little bit longer shot. My first live selection to this point, I took Brooks Koepka at 35-1. He finished runner-up on the live circuit a few weeks ago in Singapore. So I kind of feel like it's that Brooks getting ready for a major type, rounding into form situation. And we've seen him finish runner-up at Augusta twice in the past. So, this guy's figuring to be in the mix again. And then the last one was just basically done on some trends and stuff like that. He's not in great form. He's a triple-digit 100-1 long shot. We'll see. But Cameron Young is another guy that has had great success at Augusta in the past, and who knows? Maybe we get lucky with him on a flyer. But Matsuyama, Morikawa, Fleetwood, Koepka, and Cam Young are the 5 selections I have right now for Augusta coming up in a couple weeks.
Coming right up, and I know, right into your wheelhouse there. So I appreciate the information. Brady, this has been fantastic. I love this conversation. I could go on and on and on, but what's your schedule these days? I know you're, tell the audience, where they can find you, because, your information is valuable.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, I mentioned my columns at golf.com. Those come out for every PGA Tour event on Tuesday afternoon. You can read all my selections there. And like I mentioned earlier in the program, I'm giving you those selections. I have also bet them myself. And we've had a great year. I think through 10 events or so this season, we've hit 3 outright winners. So it's been very good so far. We'll see if we can continue that, knock on wood. And then, of course, on SportsGrid. I'm on SportsGrid about 5 days a week for little spots here and there. And then, of course, on the weekend, where I host a show with Adam Kaufman on both Saturday and Sunday evenings. And oftentimes we have you on there, and I'm sure we will, Ron, have you on there at least once or twice before the upcoming NFL draft.
Well, I look forward to that. It is getting to be draft season. Hopefully you'll fit in a vacation here or there as well. I know, though,
it's coming up. Fun. I got one coming up.
Good.
Usually I go right after the Super Bowl. Well, I had to postpone it a little bit, but yeah, about 3 weeks from now, I'm going to get away for about 4 days. Finally.
Okay, good. 4 days. Well, it's a start. So
that's right. That's right.
Good. Right after the Masters. So
exactly.
Fantastic.
Right after the Masters, I'm getting away.
Okay. Well, I'm sure we'll be back in touch more, relatively soon. Thanks to everybody who listened. Next week, again on Wednesday, brand new topics, brand new guests. So I'm looking forward to that one as well. Thanks everybody for listening to this one. See you in a week.